Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly stomach-churning journey back to the grimy, bustling streets of Tudor England, a time of grand palaces and flourishing arts, but also a period defined by a horrifying lack of modern sanitation. We're about to uncover the miserable and smelly job of a Gong farmer, a profession so utterly disgusting, so universally reviled, that it makes almost any other historical job seem appealing. You're going to discover the grim reasons why a person was driven to undertake the most vile task in the kingdom, a life defined by filth, stench, and profound social ostracization. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first hour on the job without throwing up, let alone an entire career. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing in a dark, narrow alleyway in London, sometime during the reign of Henry VIII, or Elizabeth II, perhaps around the mid-16th century. The air is thick, not just with the usual smells of wood smoke and unwashed humanity, but with something far more pungent, a deep, pervasive odor that hits you like a physical blow. It's the unmistakable stench of human waste everywhere, and this grimly. Is your new workplace? You are a Gong farmer. The term Gong farmer itself is a quaint euphemism. Gong or gon was a dialect word for dung or excrement, and a Gong farmer was, quite simply, someone who emptied cesspits and privets. This wasn't a choice driven by ambition. It was a desperate plunge into the absolute depths of the social and economic hierarchy, a decision born out of sheer, grinding necessity. Your life has taken a turn for the unimaginably awful. The primary reason anyone would become a Gong farmer was extreme poverty. In Tudor England, social mobility was incredibly limited, and opportunities for steady work, especially for the unskilled, were scarce. If you were a peasant driven from your land, a former soldier without prospects, or simply a person at the very bottom of the economic ladder with no other marketable skills, the Gong farmer's trade, despite its inherent repulsiveness, offered a means to survive. It offered payment, however meager. That could mean the difference between life and death for you and your family. Imagine being so utterly desperate that you would consider literally wading through human excrement as your best option. It truly sucked to be unemployed in Tudor England. The explosion of urban populations, particularly in London, exacerbated the need for this terrible profession. Medieval cities lacked modern sewage systems. Instead, most houses, from humble cottages to grand manor houses, relied on privies, outhouses, or cesspits deep, underground pits, often lined with brick, designed to collect human waste directly from latrines or chamber pots. These pits would slowly fill up, becoming immense, foul-smelling reservoirs of human excrement. When full, they required emptying, and that's where the Gong farmer came in. The sheer volume of waste generated by thousands of people meant a constant, unending demand for your services. The job, while disgusting, was essential. Without Gong farmers, cities would literally drown in their own waste, leading to even more widespread disease, unbearable stench, and a complete breakdown of urban life. You were providing a critical, albeit universally despised, public health service, yet this essential nature did nothing to elevate your social standing or diminish the revulsion with which society viewed you. Your entry into the profession would likely be through an apprenticeship to an existing Gong farmer, or simply by desperate necessity. There was no formal training, just the brutal realities of the job, You would quickly learn the practicalities, how to navigate dark, cramped spaces, how to distinguish different types of waste, as if that helped, and how to deal with the constant, overwhelming stench. You'd also learn the tacit rules of the trade. Most importantly, the unspoken societal contract that kept you and your filth out of sight and out of mind. One common misconception is that all of Tudor England was uniformly filthy, while general sanitation was poor. There were efforts, particularly in larger cities like London, to manage waste. However, these efforts were rudimentary and heavily reliant on professions like Gong farming. The very existence of such a specialized, despised trade highlights the colossal challenge of waste management in pre-modern urban environments. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of medieval and Tudor cesspits, as well as civic records and health ordinances, to understand the precise nature of waste disposal and the efforts or lack thereof to improve urban hygiene, consistently revealing a pervasive, unmanaged problem. Furthermore, the very nature of your clientele added another layer to your misery. You would serve everyone from common householders to wealthy merchants, and occasionally even members of the minor nobility. While their payments were your livelihood, their disdain would be palpable. They would view you with undisguised disgust, rushing you to complete your task and leave their premises as quickly as possible. You were a necessary evil, tolerated only for the repugnant service you provided, a grim reminder of the bodily functions they preferred to ignore. This constant, overt revulsion from society was a defining psychological burden, stripping away any sense of dignity. So, your initiation into the life of a Gong farmer was a desperate plunge into the very depths of Tudor society's grime. This wasn't a choice. It was a grim necessity, driven by extreme poverty and the demands of an unsanitary urban environment. This utterly miserable and smelly job was a brutal reality, ensuring that your life, from this moment forward, would be defined by filth, social contempt, and an unimaginable stench, the first of many horrors you were about to endure. Having plunged into the utterly repulsive reality of the Gong farmer's trade, you are immediately confronted by the fundamental elements of your profession, the tools of torment, and the immediate sensory assault of your workspace. Forget clean. Specialized equipment, your daily existence would be defined by crude implements, suffocating darkness, and a stench so overwhelming it would defy description, making your job profoundly miserable and smelly. Imagine your toolkit. It's rudimentary, unglamorous, and designed solely for the brutal task at hand. Your primary implements would be a long-handled bucket and a spade or scoop. The bucket, often made of wood or leather, would be your main vessel for extracting the putrid contents of the cesspit. The spade, crude and heavy, would be used to break apart solidified waste, to scrape the bottom of the pit, and to shovel the viscous, reeking material into your buckets. These weren't sophisticated tools. They were extensions of your own raw, straining labor, designed for maximum efficiency in the most repulsive environment imaginable. It truly sucked to have your tools be covered in excrement. Your workspace was not a brightly lit, open area. Instead, your domain was the cesspit itself. These were deep, often dark, and incredibly narrow pits, typically located beneath or beside a house's privy outhouse. They could range from a few feet deep to over 20 feet 6 meters deep, filled to the brim with years, sometimes decades, of accumulated human waste. To empty them, you would have to descend into the pit. This often involved climbing down a precarious ladder, or simply being lowered by ropes into a suffocating, putrid abyss. Imagine the terrifying claustrophobia, the feeling of solid ground disappearing above you, as you plunged into a liquid grave of human filth once in the pit. You would be plunged into perpetual darkness. The only light available would come from a flickering lantern or a torch held by an assistant at the top of the pit. This dim, unreliable light would cast grotesque shadows, illuminating only small sections of the overwhelming filth around you. The darkness would amplify your other senses, particularly the smell, making the experience even more viscerally terrifying. You would be working by feel, your hands and feet constantly immersed in the putrid depths, unable to clearly see the horrors around you. It really sucked to work in literal darkness and despair. And then there was the smell. This was the defining characteristic of your job, a pervasive, suffocating, and utterly indescribable stench that would assault every fiber of your being. It wasn't just the odor of fresh human waste. It was the accumulated, fermented, rotting smell of years of excrement, mixed with urine, decaying food scraps, and whatever else had been discarded into the pit. This smell would be so overwhelming that it would immediately trigger your gag reflex, induce nausea, and make your eyes water incessantly. Breathing would become a conscious effort, your body instinctively trying to reject the toxic air. It was a smell that would cling to your clothes, your skin, your hair, and penetrate deep into your lungs, becoming a permanent part of you. Imagine it smelling so bad that you literally couldn't escape it, ever. It really sucked to smell like human waste all the time. The gases within the cesspit were also incredibly dangerous, as organic matter decomposes in an anaerobic, oxygen-free environment. It produces various noxious and potentially lethal gases, including methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia. Hydrogen sulfide, in particular, is highly toxic, even in small concentrations, causing dizziness, nausea, and disorientation, and at higher levels, rapid unconsciousness, respiratory failure, and death. Imagine working in a confined space, inhaling these invisible, silent killers, knowing that a sudden whiff could drop you dead in an instant with no warning. Many gong farmers likely succumbed to these toxic fumes, silently asphyxiated in the depths of the pits, their bodies discovered only hours later. Your work in the pit was relentless. You would shovel the viscous, semi-solid waste into your buckets, which would then be hauled up by your assistants or a simple rope and pulley system. The weight of the filled buckets, the resistance of the thick material, and the constant strain on your back and arms would be immense. You would work quickly, desperately, driven by the desire to escape the suffocating horror of the pit as soon as possible, but also by the need to complete your task before the toxic gases overcame you. One common misconception is that cesspits were simply open holes, while some primitive ones might have been. Many Tudor-era cesspits were deep, brick-lined structures, sometimes extending below multiple floors of a building. This made their contents even more concentrated and dangerous due to reduced ventilation. The meticulous construction of these pits highlights the societal reliance on them. Despite their inherent dangers for those who had to empty them, historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Tudor cesspits, analyzing their construction, contents, and the presence of human skeletal remains sometimes from unfortunate gong farmers to understand the grim realities of waste management in pre-modern cities. Furthermore, the very nature of your job meant you were constantly covered in filth. Splashes were inevitable as you shoveled and hauled. Your clothes, your skin, your hair, all would be saturated with human excrement, blood from accidental cuts, and whatever else festered in the pit. This wasn't just disgusting, it was a profound source of shame and a visible marker of your untouchable status. Even after washing, the stench would cling to your very pores, a permanent badge of your profession. The psychological toll of working in such an environment cannot be overstated. The constant sensory assault, the claustrophobia, the fear of gases, and the sheer disgust of your work would erode your spirit. You would live with a pervasive sense of dread, knowing that your next shift would plunge you back into this unspeakable horror. This forced desensitization to the most repulsive aspects of human existence was a defining, miserable aspect of your job, leaving you a shell of your former self. So your daily life as a gong farmer was immediately defined by the very tools of your trade and the horrifying environment you inhabited. The crude implements, the suffocating darkness, the pervasive and toxic stench, and the constant threat of lethal gases combined to make every moment in the cesspit a brutal sensory assault. This intimate, horrifying confrontation with human waste was a defining, miserable, and smelly reality, ensuring that your livelihood was earned through unimaginable degradation, even as you battled the immediate sensory assault and the terrifying dangers within the cesspit. Your life as a gong farmer was further defined by a profound and pervasive social stigma. Forget respect or even mere tolerance. Your profession, though essential, marked you as an untouchable, forcing you to work under the cloak of darkness and endure profound social isolation, making your job profoundly miserable and smelly. Imagine the societal rules that governed your existence. You were known as a gong farmer or a nightman, a telling euphemism given the hours you were forced to keep. You were strictly forbidden from emptying cesspits during daylight hours. Your work had to be performed exclusively at night, usually between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. This wasn't just for practicality, though it did minimize the disruption to city life. It was a societal mandate designed to keep you and your disgusting trade out of sight, out of mind, and out of the noses of respectable citizens. You were the secret shame of the city, banished to the shadows. It truly sucked to be a professional phantom. This forced night work immediately created a life of social isolation. While others slept, you toiled. When others went about their daily business, you were resting, hidden away. This meant you couldn't participate in normal community life, no attending market fairs during the day, no socializing in taverns after sunset, no attending church services with your neighbors. Your waking hours were out of sync with society, physically separating you from the very fabric of human connection. This temporal disjunction amplified your loneliness, turning you into a perpetual outsider. The stench that was your constant companion only exacerbated this social ostracization. As we discussed, the smell of the cesspit would cling to your clothes, your skin, your hair, and penetrate deep into your pores, becoming a permanent part of you. No amount of washing, no amount of perfume could truly erase the pervasive odor. Imagine trying to interact with anyone knowing that your very presence carried the repulsive scent of human waste. People would recoil from you, cover their noses, or simply avoid you entirely. Children might point and whisper. Merchants might refuse to serve you directly. You were a walking, talking embodiment of disgust. It really sucked to smell like a social pariah. This constant revulsion from society led to profound social contempt and disgust. While your service was essential for preventing the city from literally drowning in its own waste, society showed no gratitude instead. Gong farmers were at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, often lumped together with executioners, grave diggers, and other unclean professions. You were considered ritually impure, a necessary evil tolerated only because someone had to do the job, this deep-seated disdain, often openly displayed, was a crushing psychological burden, stripping you of any semblance of dignity or self-respect. Your profession made it incredibly difficult to form personal relationships. Finding a spouse, raising a family, or making friends would be an immense challenge. Who would want to associate with someone whose very existence was defined by filth and stench? Someone whose job was so universally reviled, marriage might be limited to other Gong farmers' families, creating a small, isolated caste bound by shared misery and social exclusion? Your children would likely inherit the same stigma, making their lives just as challenging. It really sucked to be too smelly for friends. Even when you completed your work and transported the waste, your duties remained shrouded in secrecy and discretion. The waste had to be carted away to designated dumping grounds, often outside the city limits, or sometimes to farms where it was used as fertilizer, a grim irony given its source. This final act of disposal had to be swift and unseen, ensuring the clean citizens didn't have to confront the uncomfortable reality of their own bodily functions. Your very existence was a testament to society's denial. One common misconception is that the social stigma against Gong farmers was unique to Tudor England. In reality, professions dealing with waste, death, or other unclean tasks have historically faced social ostracization across many cultures and time periods, often being relegated to the lowest castes or marginalized groups. This reflects a pervasive human psychological tendency to distance oneself from unpleasant realities and the unclean. The specific rules, like night work, however, were often formalized in Tudor civic ordinances, highlighting a deliberate attempt to manage public perception and minimize contact. Historians still meticulously study medieval and early modern sumptuary laws and civic regulations to understand how different societies managed social hierarchies and unclean professions. Furthermore, the lack of a proper guild or formal organization for Gong farmers, unlike many other trades, reflected their low status. While some informal networks undoubtedly existed for practical reasons, they lacked the collective power to demand better working conditions, higher pay, or improve social standing. This further cemented their marginalized position, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation and without a collective voice to challenge their brutal reality. So, your daily life as a Gong farmer was profoundly miserable and smelly, due to the pervasive and inescapable social stigma, banished to the night, constantly reeking of human waste, and universally reviled by society. You endured profound isolation and a crushing lack of dignity. This constant public condemnation, despite the essential nature of your work, was a defining, soul-crushing burden, ensuring that your livelihood was earned through unimaginable degradation and perpetual social exclusion. Even as you toiled under the cloak of darkness and grappled with profound social stigma, your life as a Gong farmer was fundamentally defined by the filth itself. Forget merely unpleasant odors. Your daily reality involved working knee-deep in putrid, festering human waste. A truly overwhelming and suffocating experience that made your job profoundly miserable and smelly. Imagine the descent into the cesspit. As you are lowered, or climb down, into the dark, confined space, the air immediately becomes thick and heavy with a stench so concentrated, so utterly repulsive, that it hits you like a physical blow. This isn't just the smell of fresh waste, it's the accumulated, fermented, and decomposing odor of years, sometimes decades, of human excrement mixed with urine, decaying food scraps, animal carcasses, unfortunate rats or birds that fell in, and whatever other refuse had been discarded. This smell is a distinct, suffocating entity, an assault on your olfactory senses that triggers an immediate, relentless gag reflex, induces severe nausea, and makes your eyes water uncontrollably. Breathing becomes a conscious, agonizing effort, your body instinctively trying to reject the toxic, putrid air. It truly sucked to literally choke on your workplace. Once you were knee-deep, or even waist-deep, in the cesspit, the visual reality is just as horrifying. In the dim, flickering light of your lantern, you see a viscous, semi-solid mass of human excrement stretching around you. It's not a uniform consistency. There are lumps, solidified sections, floating debris, and often unseen horrors lurking beneath the surface. Your hands, gloved or bare, are constantly immersed in this putrid material as you use your spade to break it apart and shovel it into buckets. Splashes are inevitable, coating your clothes, your skin, and your hair in layers of filth. This isn't just disgusting, it's a profound violation of every human sense, a descent into pure, unadulterated bodily waste. It really sucked to literally swim in human filth. The gases emanating from the decomposing waste are not just malodorous, they are incredibly dangerous and potentially lethal as organic matter decomposes in an anaerobic, oxygen-free environment like a cesspit. It produces various noxious gases. The most dangerous include hydrogen sulfide H2S. This gas, known for its rotten egg smell at low concentrations, is quickly paralyzing to the olfactory nerves at higher concentrations, making it undetectable as it becomes more deadly. At high levels, it can cause immediate unconsciousness, respiratory failure, and death. Many gong farmers likely collapse silently, asphyxiated in the depths of the pits without warning. Methane CH4, while less directly toxic, methane is highly flammable and explosive. A dropped lantern, a spark from a tool, or even a sudden pocket of gas could trigger a devastating explosion, incinerating or burying you alive. Ammonia NH3 produced from the breakdown of urea in urine. Ammonia is a strong irritant to the eyes, nose, throat, and lungs, contributing to respiratory issues. Carbon dioxide CO2. As oxygen is consumed and organic matter decomposes, carbon dioxide can build up, displacing oxygen and leading to suffocation. Imagine working in a confined space, constantly surrounded by these invisible, silent killers, knowing that a sudden whiff or a concentrated pocket of gas could drop you dead in an instant. The fear of being overcome by fumes, trapped in the darkness beneath tons of waste, would be a terrifying, pervasive anxiety, making every breath a gamble. It really sucked to be poisoned by your own work environment. The sheer weight and resistance of the waste added to the physical torment. The material in a cesspit was not liquid. It was often dense, compacted, and sometimes solidified. Shoveling this heavy, viscous mass into buckets, breaking it apart, and pulling your feet free from its sucking embrace required immense physical strength and relentless exertion. Your muscles would scream, your back would ache, and your hands would blister, all while you battled the overwhelming stench and the fear of the invisible gases. One common misconception is that Tudor-era cesspits were always small and easily manageable. In reality, some city cesspits, particularly those serving large houses or multiple dwellings, could be enormous, designed to hold years of accumulation, some reaching depths of 20 feet or more. These larger, older pits presented even greater dangers due to deeper accumulations of gas and solid waste, requiring more arduous labor and posing higher risks for the gong farmer. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Tudor cesspits, analyzing their size, contents, and construction techniques, providing grim insights into the scale of the waste management challenge. Furthermore, the act of clearing the cesspit was often a race against time, especially in hot weather or when the waste had accumulated to dangerous levels. The pressure to complete the task quickly before the gases became too concentrated or the client became impatient would push you to work faster, increasing the risk of accidents and accidental exposure to the deadly fumes. This constant urgency added another layer of stress to an already horrifying job. The psychological toll of confronting such overwhelming filth day after day would be immense. You would become desensitized to the smell and the sight, a grim adaptation to survive. Yet, the memory of the experience, the constant immersion in human waste, would leave indelible scars on your psyche. You would live with a pervasive sense of disgust, your dignity stripped away by the very nature of your profession, reinforcing your status as an outcast in society. So, your daily life as a gong farmer was profoundly miserable and smelly due to the overwhelming reality of the filth itself, working knee-deep in putrid human waste, battling toxic gases, enduring the suffocating stench, and confronting the profound physical and psychological degradation of your job made every moment in the cesspit a brutal sensory assault. This intimate, horrifying confrontation with human excrement was a defining, terrible reality, ensuring that your livelihood was earned through unimaginable degradation and perpetual sensory torment, even as you navigated the overwhelming filth and the dangers of the cesspit. Your life as a gong farmer was a constant battle against an unseen yet profoundly terrifying enemy disease and slow poisoning. Forget minor ailments. Your daily exposure to human waste was a relentless assault on your body, making your job profoundly miserable and smelly and guaranteeing a short, agonizing life. Imagine working hour after hour, day after day, immersed in human excrement. Your skin, especially if you had any cuts, scrapes, or open sores from the rough work, was constantly exposed to a virulent cocktail of bacteria, viruses, and parasites, dysentery, typhoid fever, cholera, and various gastrointestinal infections were constant threats. Every splash, every accidental ingestion of the putrid water was a direct pathway for deadly pathogens to enter your body. You would suffer from chronic diarrhea, agonizing stomach cramps, relentless vomiting, and debilitating fevers. Your body would be perpetually weakened, making you susceptible to even minor ailments. It truly sucked to have your workplace literally trying to kill you. Beyond immediate infections, you faced the insidious danger of slow poisoning from the gases in the cesspit. As we discussed, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and ammonia were constantly produced, while some might cause immediate collapse. Chronic, low-level exposure to these gases could lead to a range of debilitating conditions. Hydrogen sulfide can cause chronic headaches, dizziness, nausea, and long-term neurological damage. Ammonia can severely irritate your respiratory system, leading to chronic bronchitis and lung damage. Methane, while less toxic, displaces oxygen, contributing to a constant state of oxygen deprivation. Your lungs, eyes, and nervous system were under constant chemical assault, slowly deteriorating with every breath. It really sucked to be poisoned by the very air you breathed. The nature of your work meant you were often covered in bodily fluids, not just from the cesspit, but also from accidental cuts or open sores. These untreated wounds, combined with constant exposure to filth, would frequently become infected, festering into pus-filled abscesses, cellulitis, or even gangrene. Without antibiotics, such infections could quickly spread, leading to limb loss or fatal sepsis. Imagine a small cut on your hand, an inevitable part of manual labor turning into a swollen, agonizing, and potentially deadly infection, slowly consuming your limb. Your body was a constant battleground for unseen pathogens. Your immune system would be perpetually compromised, the chronic exposure to bacteria, the constant fight against infection, and the likely presence of parasites within your own digestive system from contaminated food and water would leave your body's defenses severely weakened. This meant that even common colds or seasonal flus, which a healthy body could typically fight off, could quickly escalate into life-threatening conditions like pneumonia. You were a walking petri dish, a prime target for every circulating disease. It really sucked to be immune compromised by your job. The unsanitary conditions of your own person and dwelling further compounded these health risks. Despite efforts to wash, the pervasive stench and filth clung to you. Your clothes were likely never truly clean. Your living quarters, shared with other Gong farmers, would carry the same smells and potentially harbor the same pathogens, creating a continuous cycle of re-exposure. There was no escape from the environment that was systematically breaking down your health. One common misconception is that medieval people built up some kind of immunity to filth, while they might have developed some tolerance to certain local pathogens. Their short lifespans and high rates of infectious disease clearly demonstrate that their bodies were constantly under assault. Professions like Gong farming, due to their extreme exposure, were notorious for their extremely high mortality rates and short career spans, precisely because their bodies simply could not endure the constant onslaught of infection and toxic exposure. Historians still meticulously study medieval and Tudor-era civic records, including death certificates when available and guild records, often finding that Gong farmers had significantly shorter lifespans than other urban laborers, succumbing disproportionately to infectious diseases and respiratory ailments. Furthermore, the lack of modern medicine meant that there was virtually no effective treatment for the illnesses you inevitably contracted. There were no antibiotics for infections, no specific cures for dysentery, no treatments for gas poisoning. You would simply suffer, hoping your body's natural resilience was enough, or succumb to the agonizing progress of the disease. Your only cure was often the passing of time or a desperate prayer. The psychological toll of constantly battling sickness, of feeling your body slowly deteriorate, and of witnessing your comrades fall ill and die around you would be immense. You would live with a pervasive sense of dread, knowing that your profession was a slow death sentence. This constant awareness of your own mortality, coupled with the physical agony, would erode your spirit, leading to deep despair and a profound sense of hopelessness. So, your daily life as a Gong farmer was a relentless battle against disease and slow poisoning, immersed in human waste and constantly inhaling toxic gases. Your body was systematically ravaged by pathogens and corrosive chemicals. This pervasive exposure to infection, illness, and silent poisons was a defining, miserable, and smelly reality, guaranteeing a short, agonizing life, where your livelihood was earned through the very destruction of your own body, even as you faced the constant threat of disease and slow poisoning from the filth. Your grueling job as a Gong farmer had a unique, disturbing, and often higher stakes variant serving as a royal Gong farmer within the opulent, yet surprisingly unsanitary palaces of Tudor England. Forget the relative anonymity of city cesspits here. The filth was just as bad, but the consequences of error and the potential rewards were dramatically amplified, making your already miserable and smelly job even more perilous. Imagine yourself now, not in a dark London alley, but deep within the sprawling, magnificent complex of Hampton Court Palace or Whitehall Palace, one of King Henry VIII's or Queen Elizabeth III's royal residences. The grandeur is breathtaking vast courtyards, soaring ceilings, tapestries adorning every wall, and the scent of expensive perfumes and roasted meats. But beneath this glittering facade lay the same fundamental problem, said, as any other Tudor-dwelling human waste management. These palaces housed thousands of people, the monarch, the royal family, hundreds of courtiers, noblemen, ladies-in-waiting, servants, guards, and visitors. All of them ate, drank, and, inevitably, relieved themselves. It truly sucked to be the palace's secret shame. Royal palaces, despite their splendor, relied on the same basic system as any city house, privies and cesspits. While some larger palaces might have had more elaborate latrine systems or even early attempts at flush toilets like the Ajax invented by John Harrington for Queen Elizabeth II's, though not widely adopted, these still emptied into massive, deep cesspits that required manual emptying. The sheer volume of waste generated by thousands of high-ranking individuals meant that these royal cesspits were colossal. Putrid reservoirs, sometimes decades old, presenting an even more overwhelming task than a private household's pit. Imagine a cesspit that served a king. It was just as disgusting, but much, much bigger. It really sucked to clean up after royalty. Your duties as a royal gong farmer were essentially the same as your urban counterparts, descending into these vast, dark, reeking pits, shoveling solidified human waste into buckets, and hauling them out under the cover of night. The danger from toxic gases, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and disease-causing bacteria would be just as prevalent, if not more so. Given the sheer volume and age of the waste, you would still face the risks of suffocation, explosion, or falling into the putrid depths. However, the stakes were dramatically higher. Working in a royal palace meant you were operating in close proximity to the most powerful people in the kingdom. Any mistake, a spilled bucket, a misplaced tool, a lingering stench outside the designated hours could lead to severe consequences. You were directly responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of the monarch's environment, a responsibility that, if mishandled, could incur royal wrath. Imagine a noble complaining about a persistent odor and your job, or even your life, hanging in the balance. It truly sucked to be punished by the king for someone else's poop. The secrecy and discretion demanded of a royal gong farmer were paramount. The existence of such a vile profession within the walls of a magnificent palace was an embarrassing reality for the court. Your presence had to be as invisible as possible. You would operate under absolute silence, moving like a phantom in the pre-dawn hours, ensuring no one saw the unspeakable filth you managed, or heard the disgusting sounds of your work. Any breach of this discretion could lead to severe punishment, as you were privy to the most intimate and unpleasant secrets of the royal household. Yet, despite the elevated risks and demands, the position of royal gong farmer could also offer a glimmer of higher pay or more consistent work than a common city gong farmer. The sheer volume of waste and the necessity of absolute discretion meant that the monarch or the Lord Chamberlain might be willing to pay a premium for reliable, invisible service. This made the job a desperate, yet sometimes sought after, position for those at the very bottom of society, willing to exchange unimaginable degradation for a slightly better, albeit still miserable, livelihood, one particularly grim and sometimes overlooked. Detail about royal sanitation was the use of grooms of the stool. These were highly trusted, high-ranking male servants who personally attended to the monarch's bodily functions, assisting them on the privy and managing their hygiene. While a groom of the stool did not physically empty the cesspit, their close proximity to the royal waste and their intimate knowledge of royal health connected them indirectly to the world of the Gong farmer. The very existence of such a privileged yet utterly disgusting position highlights the pervasive challenges of waste management, even at the very top of Tudor society. Historians still meticulously study royal household accounts and privy chamber records to understand the intricate logistics of royal hygiene and waste disposal, often revealing a surprisingly detailed and complex system. Furthermore, the scale of royal events added another layer of complexity during lavish banquets, state visits, or royal progress. The number of people in the palace could swell dramatically, generating an even greater volume of waste in a shorter period. This would mean longer, more arduous shifts for the royal Gong farmers, pushing them to their physical limits to maintain palace cleanliness under intense pressure. The ephemeral glory of a royal feast was built on the anonymous, unspeakable labor of those who cleaned up its aftermath. The psychological burden of serving royalty in such a disgusting capacity would be immense. You would witness the opulence, the power, and the seemingly effortless lives of the courtiers and the monarch, while knowing that your own existence was defined by their most repulsive bodily functions. This stark contrast between their grandeur and your degradation, this intimate knowledge of their filth, would create a profound sense of ironic detachment and perhaps a simmering resentment, in addition to your overall misery. So, your life as a royal Gong farmer was a profoundly miserable and smelly existence, intensified by the unique pressures of the royal court. You navigated vast, putrid cesspits, under the constant threat of toxic gases and royal wrath, all while maintaining absolute discretion. This higher stakes version of the most disgusting job in Tudor England was a defining, profoundly challenging reality, ensuring that even within the glittering walls of a palace, your livelihood was earned through unimaginable degradation and perpetual proximity to the foulest secrets of royalty. Even as you toiled in the terrifying darkness of cesspits, whether for commoners or royalty, your life as a Gong farmer was indelibly marked by a pervasive, inescapable, and profoundly miserable characteristic: the smell. Forget merely an unpleasant odor. This was a permanent, pervasive stench that clung to your body, your clothes, and your home, marking you as an untouchable in Tudor society. Imagine trying to describe this smell. It wasn't just the fleeting odor of a public latrine. This was the concentrated, fermented, putrefying essence of years, sometimes decades, of human excrement mixed with urine, decaying food, and various bodily fluids. It was a thick, heavy, cloying stench that permeated the very air you breathed in the cesspit, assaulting your nostrils, triggering your gag reflex, and causing your eyes to water uncontrollably. It was the smell of decomposition, of methane, of hydrogen sulfide, and countless other vile compounds. It truly sucked to literally breathe your job. But the horror didn't end when you climbed out of the cesspit. The smell, your defining professional characteristic, was inescapable. It clung to your work clothes, saturating the rough wool or linen fibers, refusing to be dislodged by mere water or sunshine. Imagine wearing clothes that perpetually reeked of human waste, a constant, vile presence that you could never truly escape. These were not garments you could simply throw in a modern washing machine. They were soaked in layers of organic filth, impossible to fully sanitize. You might try to wash them in a river or a basin, But the smell would linger, a phantom tormentor, and the smell didn't just cling to your clothes, it permeated your skin and hair. Despite repeated attempts to wash, to scrub your body raw, the pervasive odor would seem to seep from your very pores. Imagine trying to wash away years of accumulated stench, constantly aware that a faint, yet undeniable, repulsive aroma emanated from your body. You might try to mask it with cheap perfumes or strong herbs, but the underlying smell of putrefaction would always win, a grim battle you were destined to lose. It really sucked to be permanently smelly. This permanent stench had profound social consequences. It was your identifier, your indelible mark. People could smell you before they saw you. As a Gong farmer, you were forced to work at night precisely to avoid offending the delicate sensibilities of daytime society. Even then, the smell would precede you or follow you, making any attempt at normal social interaction incredibly difficult. Imagine walking into a market and seeing people subtly recoil, cover their noses, or move away from you simply because of the pervasive, invisible cloud of your profession. Your own home would also carry the pervasive stench. Your clothes would be stored there. Your tools might be stored nearby. And the constant exposure would mean that your living space, however clean you tried to keep it, would always have that faint, underlying odor of human waste. This meant there was no true escape, no sanctuary from the smell. You lived, ate, and slept immersed in the very essence of your disgusting trade, even in your moments of supposed rest. It really sucked to have your home smell like your job. This constant sensory assault and the resulting social ostracization led to immense psychological distress. The knowledge that you perpetually reeked, that society viewed you with undisguised disgust, would chip away at your self-esteem, leading to feelings of profound shame, worthlessness, and isolation. You would live with a constant awareness of your unclean status, a burden far heavier than any bucket of waste. This constant, dehumanizing reality would erode your spirit, leaving you a shell of your former self, perpetually miserable. One common misconception is that medieval people were simply used to bad smells and were unaffected. While their olfactory tolerance might have been higher than modern sensibilities, chronic exposure to such overwhelming, putrid odors would still have negative physiological and psychological effects, including nausea, headaches, respiratory irritation, and profound emotional distress. The very fact that Gong farmers were forced to work at night and were socially shunned indicates that their smell was indeed considered deeply offensive, not simply a normal part of urban life. Historians still meticulously study ancient and medieval olfactory environments through textual analysis and archaeological evidence of waste management, revealing that pervasive bad smells were indeed a constant feature of even pre-modern urban life, but also actively avoided and considered problematic. Furthermore, the smell could sometimes be a harbinger of literal danger. The most putrid, suffocating odors from cesspits were often indicative of high concentrations of lethal gases like hydrogen sulfide. Your nose, while assaulted, could also be giving you a subtle warning, a horrifying paradox where the intensity of the smell correlated with the immediate threat to your life. This made the stench not just disgusting, but a constant, terrifying indicator of unseen peril. So, your life as a Gong farmer was indelibly marked by the pervasive, inescapable stench of human waste, this constant sensory assault. The physical manifestation of your disgusting trade clung to your body, your clothes, and your home, ensuring your profound social ostracization and perpetual misery. This defining characteristic, more than any other, made your job profoundly miserable and smelly, reducing you to an untouchable in Tudor society, forever marked by the vile odors of your profession, even as you lived under the suffocating cloud of perpetual stench and social ostracization. Your grueling work as a gong farmer was driven by a desperate, fundamental need: money. Forget dreams of wealth. Your precarious financial reality offered a glimmer of hope, often paying better than some alternatives, yet still trapped you in a cycle of squalor and perpetual debt, making your job profoundly miserable and smelly. Imagine the choice that led you to this profession. In Tudor England, for the vast majority of the population, life was a constant struggle against poverty. Work was seasonal, wages low, and famine or disease could swiftly plunge families into destitution. The gong farmer's job, despite its inherent repulsiveness, offered a crucial advantage. It was consistent work, in constant demand, in rapidly growing, unsanitary cities. People always needed their cesspits emptied, regardless of the weather or economic downturns. This consistency offered a level of security that many other laborers could only dream of. It truly sucked to have stable employment in human waste. Furthermore, the pay for a gong farmer was often surprisingly higher than that of an unskilled laborer or even some skilled trades. This premium was directly proportional to the job's extreme unpleasantness and danger. People were willing to pay more to avoid doing the job themselves, and to compensate you for literally risking your life in toxic filth. While records vary, a gong farmer could earn a decent wage for a single pit, and if diligent, might earn more in a week than a common agricultural laborer in a month. This financial incentive was the grim carrot that lured desperate individuals into the trade. However, this higher pay was a deceptive glimmer. Your income, while better than some, was often still precarious and insufficient to truly escape the cycle of poverty. The money earned was quickly consumed by the high cost of living in urban centers, and often by the need to support a struggling family back in the countryside or to repay debts incurred before entering the profession. You might earn enough to keep yourself from starving, but rarely enough to build significant savings or elevate your social status. Imagine earning more than your peasant brother, but still living in squalor. It really sucked to be richer than dirt, but still poor. Your expenses were also calculated to the job, while not directly recorded. You would need to invest in rudimentary equipment buckets, spades, ropes, lanterns, which would wear out quickly in the corrosive environment of a cesspit. You might also have to pay for the services of assistants to help you haul the waste, further reducing your net income, and the psychological toll of the job might lead to spending habits, heavy drinking that further strained your finances. The very nature of your job often led to debt if you needed to buy equipment or had a lean period. You might borrow from moneylenders, often at exorbitant interest rates. This cycle of debt could be difficult to escape, ensuring that even when you earned more, a significant portion of your income went towards simply staying afloat, rather than improving your living conditions or escaping the trade. One common misconception is that all medieval or Tudor dirty jobs paid poorly. While many did, professions directly dealing with highly unpleasant or dangerous waste management like gong farming or leather tanning, which used urine and feces, often commanded a premium precisely because of the extreme conditions and social stigma. This hazard pay was a grim recognition of the unique sacrifices these laborers made. Historians still meticulously study medieval and Tudor economic records, including wages and cost of living data, to understand the precise financial realities of various urban professions and how the hazard premium worked for such jobs. Furthermore, your financial situation was also tied to the demand for your services, while cities generally grew and generated more waste, An outbreak of plague or other epidemics could temporarily depopulate areas, reducing the number of households needing service, or making it too dangerous to work. This meant your income could be unpredictable, subject to the whims of disease and population shifts, adding another layer of insecurity to your already challenging life. The stigma of your profession also meant that while you might have more cash than some, your ability to integrate into the wider economic or social fabric was still limited. Merchants might be reluctant to extend you credit, or landlords might charge you more for lodging due to the smell. Your wealth was often a lonely wealth. Unable to buy you true respect or upward mobility, you might be able to afford better food or clothing than a peasant, but you still couldn't escape the pervasive social judgment. So, your life as a Gong farmer was a cruel paradox of precarious financial stability. You earned a decent wage by the standards of the time, often more than other laborers, but this monetary hope was perpetually undermined by the inherent dangers, the high costs of living, and the inescapable social stigma. This relentless struggle against poverty and debt, despite your essential and highly unpleasant service, was a defining, profoundly miserable, and smelly reality. Ensuring that your livelihood was earned through both physical degradation and perpetual financial insecurity, even as your wallet held a precarious glimmer of hope and your body struggled against the daily filth. The most pervasive and truly soul-crushing misery of your life as a Gong farmer was your profound social ostracization. Forget mere discomfort or polite avoidance, your profession marked you as an untouchable, feared, avoided, and universally despised by Tudor society, making your job profoundly miserable and smelly. Imagine stepping out of your humble lodging after a long night of work, trying to quickly attend to your needs before the city fully awoke. The sun might be just beginning to rise, casting long shadows, but your presence would immediately draw a distinct reaction. People could smell you before they saw you. The pervasive, inescapable stench of human waste seeped into your skin, hair, and clothing was your indelible mark as you walked. You would notice people subtly recoil, cover their noses, avert their gaze, or even cross the street to avoid passing too close. Children might point and whisper, quickly shushed by their disgusted parents. You were a walking, talking embodiment of everything society found repulsive. It truly sucked to be a human stink bomb. This physical revulsion immediately translated into profound social contempt, while your service was absolutely essential for preventing the city from drowning in its own waste and rampant disease. Society showed you no gratitude, no respect, and certainly no admiration. Instead, you were at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, beneath even the poorest beggar. You were considered unclean, not just physically, but morally and ritually. Your profession was lumped together with executioners, grave diggers, knackers, those who disposed of dead animals, and other unclean or despised trades. You were a necessary evil, tolerated only because someone had to do the job. This deep-seated disdain, often openly displayed through gestures and words, was a crushing psychological burden that eroded any semblance of dignity or self-worth. Your forced night work, as we discussed, was a direct consequence of this stigma. You were banished to the shadows, allowed to perform your vital service only when respectable citizens were asleep, ensuring you remained out of sight and out of mind. This immediately led to profound social isolation. You couldn't participate in normal daytime community life, no attending market fairs with your peers, no casual socializing in taverns, no attending public festivals or church services with your neighbors. Your waking hours were out of sync with the rest of society, physically separating you from the very fabric of human connection. This temporal disjunction amplified your loneliness, turning you into a perpetual outsider, a ghost in the daylight hours. It really sucked to be a professional phantom. Forming personal relationships would be an immense challenge. Finding a spouse, raising a family, or making friends would be incredibly difficult. Who would willingly associate, let alone marry, someone whose very existence was defined by filth and stench? Someone whose job was so universally reviled, marriage might be limited to other Gong farmers' families, creating a small, isolated caste bound by shared misery and social exclusion. Perpetuating the stigma for the next generation, your children would likely inherit the same social untouchability, making their lives just as challenging and limited. It really sucked to be too smelly for a normal life. Even when you tried to spend your hard-earned money, the stigma would follow you. Shopkeepers might serve you grudgingly, pushing your goods across the counter rather than touching your hand. Landlords might charge you higher rent or refuse to let to you entirely, forcing you into the most squalid and isolated dwellings. Your wealth, such as it was, could not buy you true respect or integration into society. You were defined by your smell, not your coins. One common misconception is that medieval and Tudor societies were entirely unconcerned with personal cleanliness or odors. While their standards were different from ours, pervasive, offensive smells were indeed actively avoided and considered problematic. The very existence of civic ordinances requiring Gong farmers to work at night, and the widespread use of perfumes and aromatic herbs by the wealthy, clearly indicates a strong aversion to foul odors and those associated with them. The formalized nature of the Gong farmers' banishment to night work highlights a deliberate attempt by society to manage the unpleasant reality of waste. Historians still meticulously study civic records, sanitation ordinances, and contemporary literature, including satirical poems or plays, to understand the precise social and cultural attitudes towards waste and unclean professions in Tudor England, consistently revealing a deep-seated revulsion and systematic marginalization. Furthermore, the lack of a proper guild or formal professional organization for Gong farmers, unlike many other trades like goldsmiths or mercers, reflected and reinforced their low status. Without a collective body to advocate for their rights, demand better working conditions, or lobby for improved social standing, they remained vulnerable to exploitation and without a collective voice to challenge their brutal reality. They were a fragmented, isolated workforce, easily exploited by those who benefited from their misery. The psychological toll of enduring such profound and constant social ostracization cannot be overstated. The knowledge that you perpetually reeked, that society viewed you with undisguised disgust, would chip away at your self-esteem, leading to deep feelings of shame, worthlessness, and profound loneliness. You would live with a constant awareness of your unclean status, a burden far heavier than any bucket of waste. This constant, dehumanizing reality would erode your spirit, leaving you a shell of your former self, perpetually miserable and deeply resentful of the society that simultaneously needed and despised you. So, your daily life as a Gong farmer was profoundly miserable and smelly due to the pervasive and inescapable social ostracization, banished to the night, constantly reeking of human waste, and universally reviled by Tudor society. You endured profound isolation and a crushing lack of dignity. This constant, public condemnation, despite the essential nature of your work, was a defining, soul-crushing burden, ensuring that your livelihood was earned through unimaginable degradation and perpetual social exclusion. You've battled through the initial plunge into filth, wielded your crude tools in suffocating darkness, endured the overwhelming stench, fought off pervasive diseases and slow poisoning, survived the higher stakes of royal service, and weathered the soul-crushing weight of social ostracization and precarious finances, as the phantom odors finally dissipate and the imagined grime washes away. A profound, lingering truth settles upon you. The life of a Gong farmer in Tudor England was a misery-ridden existence, guaranteeing a short, brutal, and often unsung, unclean, and unremembered end. Consider the relentless assault on your body. From your first day in the cesspit, your lungs were constantly bombarded by toxic gases and putrid fumes, slowly but surely destroying your respiratory system. Your skin was perpetually irritated by salt and exposed to legions of bacteria and parasites, leading to chronic infections and open sores. Your body was in a constant state of battle against filth-borne diseases like dysentery and typhoid, which, in an age without modern sanitation or medicine, were rampant and often fatal. Every shift was a gamble, every breath a risk. Your existence was a continuous, physically degrading torment, slowly eroding your health and vitality. It truly sucked to be a human filter for filth. Then there's the profound psychological and social degradation. You were an outcast, banished to the night. Your very presence a source of universal revulsion. The pervasive, inescapable stench clung to you, acting as a permanent marker of your unclean status, separating you from society. This led to deep isolation, making it incredibly difficult to form meaningful relationships or integrate into community life. You lived with a constant awareness of being despised, an essential service provider who was, nevertheless, an untouchable. This stripping away of dignity, this constant public avoided condemnation, left deep, invisible scars on your spirit, transforming you into a miserable, often cynical, shell of your former self. Your mental landscape was as bleak as the pits you emptied. And finally, the grim reality of your end. For most Gong farmers, their lives were tragically short. The constant exposure to toxic gases, the frequent bouts of infectious disease, and the physically exhausting nature of the work meant that your body simply wore out prematurely. You were far more likely to die from a respiratory illness, a severe infection, or an accidental fall into a cesspit than from old age. Imagine collapsing from a sudden fever in your crude dwelling, your body burning, your lungs failing, with no doctor willing to come near you, and only other equally sick and exhausted Gong farmers for comfort. Your death would likely be swift, unceremonious, and often without public mourning. It really sucked to live a short, smelly, sick life. Your death would be as anonymous as your life was disgusting. There would be no grand funeral, no elaborate tombstone, no eulogies praising your contribution to society. Your body, perhaps still faintly reeking of the cesspit, would likely be buried in a pauper's grave or a communal burial ground, unmarked and quickly forgotten. Your name would not appear in any civic records beyond perhaps a sparse mention in a parish death register. Your legacy would be the invisible cleanliness of the city streets, a cleanliness that no one acknowledged, and a historical memory almost entirely erased by the sheer revulsion of your trade. You were the forgotten essential worker, whose sacrifice enabled the delicate sensibilities of Tudor society. For your family, your death would often mean a plunge into even deeper destitution. Without your specialized and relatively higher-paying income, they would face immense hardship, perhaps resorting to begging, entering the workhouse, or scattering to find any available labor. The cycle of poverty and misery which had drawn you to the Gong farmer's trade, would continue, unbroken, for those you left behind. Your personal sacrifice, while perhaps providing a brief reprieve, rarely led to a lasting escape from the depths of societal hardship for your lineage. It really sucked that your misery was inherited. One particularly poignant and often overlooked detail is the legal obligation that bound Gong farmers. Many had contracts with specific households or urban areas, requiring them to empty pits at set intervals. This meant that even if they were ill or exhausted, they were still expected to fulfill their duties. Failure could lead to fines or even imprisonment, further exacerbating their misery and forcing them to work when their bodies were at their weakest. This legal framework, designed to ensure public sanitation, added another layer of inescapable burden to an already brutal existence. Historians still meticulously study civic ordinances and contract records from Tudor towns to understand the precise legal obligations and working conditions of Gong farmers, often finding a detailed yet grim pictures of this regulated misery. The existence of the Gong farmer profession also highlights a profound, unresolved debate among historians about the true state of sanitation in early modern cities. While the grandeur of Tudor architecture and court life is celebrated, the daily reality of waste management reveals a shocking level of filth and disease that underpinned much of urban existence. The Gong farmer was a direct symptom of this massive public health challenge, a living embodiment of the tension between burgeoning urban populations and rudimentary infrastructure. Their life was a testament to the fact that progress in one area often came at the severe cost of human dignity and health in another, often hidden sector. Ultimately, your life as a Gong farmer in Tudor England was a profound and constant paradox. You performed an essential, vital service that saved countless lives from disease and made urban living tolerable for others. Yet, you were universally despised, lived in squalor, suffered chronic illness, and faced an early, unmourned death. Your existence was a testament to the raw, unspoken realities of a pre-modern world, a chilling reminder that behind every grand society lay the anonymous, miserable and smelly lives of those who literally cleaned up its mess. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant echoes of Tudor London's bustling streets and the imagined stench of its hidden cesspits finally fade into the quiet background of history. You're safe, warm, and clean, incredibly far removed from the brutal realities of a Gong farmer's existence. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of modern sanitation, health, and dignity. A stark contrast to the miserable and smelly truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night and have sweet dream, and have